Just give me the go ahead, Chris.
Okay, yeah, we're recording now. Just by way of quick introductions, thanks everybody first of all for joining on my team. Glad that everybody was able to carve out some time. I was giving some kind of teaser for this, but Tom and I have known each other for a little while, and he's got a reputation in Nashville, if you will, for working in the product space. And we've just been collaborating in different ways through the years, off and on. And he's been developing some curriculum and other information that's really valuable in a product management context, and reached out as he has done in the past to see if we would be willing to hear him out as he walks through some of that, both for our benefit and then also to provide him with some feedback as he continues to optimize that. So with that in mind, I hope it's valuable to everybody involved. And then I'll pass it over here to Tom to take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate that. So as Chris said, I've created a product management consultancy about 3 years ago after around 30 years in product management, before anybody knew what it was called. And I am in the process of trying to create a product out of product management. And so one of the things I'm developing to move that forward is the 12 steps of product management, which is based on the idea that if you can improve your relationships at work, you can improve your effectiveness. So before today's session, Chris let me send a survey out to the group asking you all about which of the 12 steps you wanted to hear about. And we'll go through the results of that survey, as well as a little game that was associated with the survey that allowed you to put those 12 steps into practice. So we're going to review the steps that you guys were most interested in hearing about, as well as giving you a chance to apply those in practice through that little game. So a little bit of background about me is I came to Vanderbilt from New Jersey back in 1987. I was going to write the great American novel like Jack Kerouac up there. I wrote a couple of screenplays and found out that they were bad. And so while I was writing, I was getting my MED and became an education researcher at Vanderbilt, working on a really interesting program to promote science and math to middle school kids using laser discs. So this is pre-internet. And most of the really great ideas, or a lot of them I've heard in my career, I heard in that early time as a researcher. And I went and applied my research and learning at Quorum Health Resources, where I started their product management department and won their innovation award twice, and then left there to go to HealthStream. In my time at HealthStream, I was responsible for their largest product by revenue. We saw our revenue go from 60 million to over 200 million while I was there. Our stock price went from $3 a share to over $30 a share. We grew from about 1.5 million users to over 4 million users when I left. And I learned a lot there about what it means to grow a business in collaboration with every aspect of the business. And a lot of what I learned there became the foundation of the 12 steps of product management. I also have a background working for private equity-backed companies. I was commuted between here and Stockton, California for a couple of years, building the product management group for Therapeutic Research Center, which is a medication therapy management company. And then left there and founded Fortune's Path about 3 years ago. A couple of our big clients here in town, just HealthStream, Verity, you can see those guys up there. I'm happy to talk about any of those if folks are interested, but just wanted to give you some idea about my background. So Mary Parker Follett is the founder of Modern Management. She's considered the mother of modern management. And I love this quote because she's saying that management is the art of getting things done through people. And I think this is why the quality of our relationships at work are so important, and why they have such an influence on our performance, and not just our performance, but our happiness and our enjoyment at work. So I want to talk a little bit about why relationships are important, how the 12 steps can help you improve those relationships. To give you a little bit more background about how I think this is practical to you, I found a really nice piece of content marketing from a SaaS company called, Workfront. I don't particularly care about Workfront, but I do think that their content marketing piece was really interesting. It was a survey of over 2,000 people working in US companies of at least 500 employees. And some really interesting takeaways came out of this survey about what are some of the most common sources of conflict, what part of your day is taken up with different activities, how would you rate your coworkers, and what are the primary reasons why a project might get delayed. I think all of these are important to product managers, marketers, product owners, and product designers. And the three main things that come out of it is that there's conflicting priorities, lack of communication, and problems with scope and prioritization. All of those elements can be addressed by improving your business relationships. So this is how you guys said that you wanted to, the steps that you all said you wanted to hear more about. The winners were step 4, step 7, and step 11. So those are to decide what kind of a leader you want to be, embrace your assets and give up your defects, and seek to improve your insight through contact with customers, colleagues, and other product leaders. So we're going to start off with step 4 about deciding what kind of a leader you want to be. So this is how Fortune's Path defines leadership types and styles. The first thing I think you need to determine in your career, and this can take quite a long time, is to decide what you want the scope of your leadership to be. It's also okay if this changes over time as you get more experience in your career, but do you want to be an individual contributor, a team leader, a group leader, or an organizational leader? Each of those is a very honorable choice. And we'll talk a little bit more about examples of people who excel at each of those in a little bit. And then the other thing I want you to think about after you think about your scope, which is how you lead, who is that going to affect? As an individual contributor, really, your scope is yourself. But if you aspire to be an organizational leader, you want to have a scope where your leadership is going to affect tens, dozens, perhaps thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people. And I want you to think about what kind of type of leader do you want to be? And this is a very gross oversimplification of leadership types, of being either good or bad, and then for styles being either selfless or selfish. And it is possible to be a good selfless leader, which is what I would encourage all of you to be. It's also possible to be a selfless bad leader, where you may create confusion, but you still celebrate others. Or to be a good selfish leader, where you create clarity in your organization, but you also tend to steal credit. I don't want you to confuse, though, these ethics with outcomes. Ethics and outcomes are separate, except in one very important area, which is the quality of your life. I believe that if you choose to be an ethical leader and to lead an ethical life, you'll be happier. And I'm really defining this in a classical sense, kind of the way Aristotle thought about the purpose of life, which was to pursue virtue, and that the result, the reward of virtue, was happiness. Now, Jim Collins looks at leadership from a very different lens. He sees it from an effectiveness lens. And in 2001, he published a best-selling, very famous book called Good to Great, which was based on the study of the financial performance of about 1,400 plus public companies. And he wanted to find what were the things that made those companies outperform their peers and the rest of the market by at least 3 times. And one of the most famous outcomes from his study was the concept of the level 5 leader, which is someone who builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical combination of humility and professional will. So what I want you to take away from Jim Collins's idea about good to great is this concept of humility and how that can be beneficial to your career, and if you desire, even beneficial to your accumulation of power. So this is a long quote from an article that Collins published in Fast Company in October of 2001. The part there in orange is the one, to me, is the most striking, and I want you to, is very much related to the points I'm trying to make in the 12 steps, which is that if you want to be this level 5 leader, you're going to need to make choices based on what's best for the company. rather than what's best for you individually. And where celebrity CEOs or leaders at a decision point would choose what was best for them, those transformative leaders, according to Collins, would choose what was best for the greater good. And they also tended to organize their work around an idea bigger than themselves. Now, I have a couple of beefs with Collins's good to great model. Many of the companies he identified, Wells Fargo, Kroger, Pitney Bowes, Walgreens, Gillette, Nucor, they read a bit like a list of dinosaurs, non-tech companies that may be ripe for disruption. And some of them have already been disrupted since Collins wrote his book. The other thing that I have a bit of a beef with is it sort of infers that if we're not all level 5 leaders, we're somehow underachievers. We haven't succeeded quite as much as we should. And I want you to forget about that. So the 3 highly successful people on this slide, none of them are level 5 leaders. You have Ringo Starr, who was probably a level 2 leader. He was a team contributor and also maybe the most successful rock and roll drummer of all time. You have Megan Rapinoe, one of the most successful athletes of the modern era, an entrepreneur, a social activist, and a model to millions. And then you have Einstein, who perhaps more than any other thinker transformed our concepts of reality and the nature of reality, and was really not more than an individual contributor. And yet the contribution he made remade the entire world. So don't feel compelled as you're choosing what kind of a leader you want to be Napoleon, who is obviously a level 5 leader, who transformed France, introduced the Age of Empires, introduced the Napoleonic Code, perhaps the most influential code of law since the Romans, and who was also responsible for the deaths of over 400,000 of his own men when they marched back, when they had to retreat from Russia in the frozen winter after their defeat to the Russians, but not at an enormous cost to the people of Russia and to the destruction of countless villages and cities. This is a map, by the way, by Charles Menard, who is one of the most famous information designers in history, and he's an inspiration to Edward Tufte, who's an inspiration to me, who's the founder of information design. And that map's worth a whole hour-long talk just in itself. So it's a bit about step 4. Let me stop and see if anybody has any questions or comments, any things you want to take issue with, or any things you want me to explore before I go on to step 7. You can raise your hand or you can just send me a chat. So I'll pause for a moment.
I actually think we can't send you a chat.
Oh.
I seem to be hard locked to chatting with Chris. I don't know if that's just some beef that he has with me, but
Same way too.
Wow. Let me see what
I tried to make a joke about Napoleon and nobody responded, and I was like, come on, that was pretty funny. And
Tell
then,
me your joke.
oh, I was just saying that he's not so high on the humility scale for a level 5 leader.
He is most definitely not high on the humility scale. Perhaps he only made it to level 4, where it was more about him.
Okay.
Okay. Well, Chris, do you have any idea what our chat thing is?
I'm working on it. I don't know why it's being difficult, but you can keep moving forward, and I'll figure it out.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Let's talk a little bit about step 7, giving up your, embracing your assets and giving up your defects. I want to talk a little bit about David Ortiz, Big Papi. So David Ortiz was a all-star designated hitter and first baseman, first with the Minnesota Twins, and then in 2003, he was traded to the Boston Red Sox and was instrumental in their World Series run. So the chart you're looking at here shows David's contributions in wins above a replacement player for both hitting and defense and fielding, and from 2003 to 2016 in his time with the Red Sox. So the white line in the middle, the 0 point, represents what an ordinary replacement player would do. Basically 0 contribution above a fully replaceable part. You could go down to the minor leagues, find someone of equal ability, stick them in the lineup, and they would neither help nor hurt the team above another person of their ability. If a player scores at 2 or above in a category hitting, they're an all-star quality. If they're scoring in the level of 5 and above, they're MVP quality. So what this chart tells us is that over the course of these 13 years, David Ortiz was almost always at least an all-star and often an MVP quality hitter. What it also tells us is that he was an atrocious fielder. So the green bars are always below that replacement level. That means you could pretty much go down to a high school and find people who are vastly better at fielding first base than David Ortiz was. So more so than many, many other players, he had an enormous gap between what he was really good at and what he was terrible at. He was a fantastic hitter. He was an absolutely atrocious fielder. And so if you look at his starts by position over those 13 years, the blue bars represent when he played as a designated hitter, meaning he never had to go into the field. Or he was at first base where he had to unfortunately take his glove and go out and embarrass himself. You can see a strong downward trend in his starts at first base because he was focusing on those things that he was good at, and he was giving up the things that he was bad at. And I'm going to encourage all of you to do the same thing. Think about something in your career that you're not very good at. And instead of spending a lot of sweat and effort to maybe get to be average by pulling that up, drop it. Just stop doing it. Delegate it. Give it to somebody else. Get it out of your job description. If you're spending a ton of your time working on things you're not very good at, you're in the wrong job. You're the wrong fit for that position. Focus your time and effort on those things when you can reach all-star or MVP status, where you can be really, really good. And all that stuff in your day that is just crap that you have to do that you really aren't good at, try to get rid of it. Like I said, to hire someone to do that stuff. There are so many people in the world more talented than I am at things like project management or writing requirements. And so I bring those people into Fortune's Path and let them do that work because they're going to do it better than I do it. If we hang on to things because we're afraid to give them up, it's a disservice to ourselves, to our customers, and to the organization. So think hard about that stuff that you're really good at. Commit to doing that stuff, and then try to give up or delegate the stuff that you're not any good at. So I mentioned Aristotle a little earlier in the presentation, one of my personal intellectual heroes. Aristotle defines a virtue as the balance between two vices, one which is an excess and the other is a deficiency, or the golden mean. So I want to apply that concept of the golden mean back to our friend David Ortiz. And I want to show you David's home runs and walks over this 13-year span when he was so valuable to the White Sox. And why I'm focusing on home runs and walks is because they represent two extremes of what you have to do to be successful hitting a baseball. A home run is an expression of the most aggressive thing a baseball player can do that's productive for their team. Charging the mound is maybe the most aggressive thing you can do, but it's not productive. And then the most passive thing you can do as a baseball player, which is taking a walk. That means you have to watch at least 4 pitches go by without swinging at them. And so to balance both the aggressiveness of swinging hard to hit home runs and the passivity of watching pitches go by, it's the mean between those things that allows David to be successful and hit home runs. So the average player in baseball might hit 22, 23 home runs a year over this course of time. So David was never worse than average over these 13 years and was often significantly better than average, hitting 54 home runs in 2006 and walking 119 times, his best year over this span. So you'll notice that as he gets that balance right, as he walks more, he tends to hit more home runs. And then on the tail end of his career, in those last 4 years, he strikes almost a perfect balance when he's approaching age 40, which is old for a baseball player. And he hits between 30 and 38 home runs and walks between 75 and 80 times in each of those years. An amazing level of consistency by striking that balance of embracing those things that you're good at, giving up the things that you're bad at, finding that golden mean between two vices to embrace your virtue. Step 11 is to seek to improve our insight through contact with customers, colleagues, and other product leaders. And we're back to our friend, Mary Parker Follett. One of the ideas that Parker Follett had is that a problem has to be defined within a social, the problem and a solution need to be defined within a social context. And that you need to think about the people involved in the organization that is having that problem and involve those people in the creation of the solution to that problem. So she's a bit of an anti-classicist in thinking that these issues are socially contextualized and the solutions for them are also socially contextualized. So I want to encourage you to think about the problems you encounter in work exist in a social context and in relation to others who you work with. So when you're seeking to improve your insight, look outside your normal social group. Define your colleagues very broadly. These are two quotes that I really like from Parker Follett. The first one, neither working for someone nor paying someone's wages ought to give you power over them. And then the second one, it's a mistake to think that social progress is dependent upon anything happening to the working people. It's equally a mistake to think that what we need is the conversion to unselfishness of the capitalist class. So I interpret the first one as meaning no one owns you and you don't own anyone else. And I interpret the second one as meaning don't try to change people. Instead, you want to develop not power over people, but develop power with people. That's a Parker Follettism. That's not original. And I really like that concept of power with. And I think it's super important to people in product management to think about that power you have in that position is really dependent upon you collaborating with the people around you to try to help bring the best out in them and to do the best work and create the best solution for your clients. So I've recently fallen in love with Breath of the Wild, which is a new, relatively new video game for the Nintendo Switch platform. And in Breath of the Wild, you start out as Link, who's a young adventurer waking up from a 100-year sleep. And when you wake up, you have absolutely nothing. And to succeed in the game, you have to explore an enormous world, turning over every rock and looking on every tree for whatever mushroom or ruby you're going to need to solve the puzzle. I want to encourage you as product people every day to get up and think about yourself as Link getting up from that 100-year rest. You have nothing. And to get what you need to succeed, you have to listen carefully to everybody in the organization, to all of your customers, and to keep an open mind about where you're going to find that ruby that's going to solve the next puzzle. And while you're on your quest, I'm going to encourage you to become aware of your own cognitive biases because they will definitely get you. Cognitive biases can be very helpful for making quick decisions, but they can also blind us to important insights. And so there are 4 cognitive biases that are among my favorites that I want to make you all aware of. So as you're seeking out insight from your colleagues and from customers, you can help remove those blinders that you might have that prevents you from finding the ruby you need to solve the puzzle. So one of them is confirmation bias. That's the tendency to search for, interpret, and focus on information that confirms what we already believe. CEOs, entrepreneurs in general, are extremely vulnerable to confirmation bias because they're so emotionally invested in the idea that they're trying to bring to life. And it is either, if they're product people, into their concept of a product, or if they're maybe financial or sales people, into their idea of a market, they're extremely invested in that. And it's a struggle sometimes to hold our confirmation bias in check. The second one I want to draw your attention to is conservatism, which is the tendency to revise your beliefs insufficiently when presented with new evidence. So similar to confirmation bias, it's a bit that we're unwilling to give up an old idea in the face of new evidence. We might, adjust it some, perhaps not quite enough. One of the great challenges of product management and business in general is that you're always going to be working with imperfect information. You'll never know everything you really need to know to make the best possible decisions. So a lot of the times you're guessing. Try to make those guesses as well as you can, and be aware of them and keep track of them and write them down and measure them as new information comes in. Another bias I want you to be aware of is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the tendency for unskilled individuals to overestimate their own ability and the tendency for experts to underestimate their own ability. This is why salespeople think your job is easy, is because they're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect. They don't understand everything that goes in. Some of them, I want to say all salespeople, but some salespeople don't understand everything necessary to get out a release and make that release successful. They haven't done your job. But we always think somebody else's job is easy. From the outside, it always looks easy. And so we have a tendency, it's just a natural in-baked tendency, to overestimate our ability to do somebody else's job. But we also have a tendency to as an expert, to underestimate our own ability. And one of the reasons why is that as you grow in expertise, you're going to discover more and more things you don't know. And that's good. That really is the evolution of your education, is embracing that idea of that the older I get, the less I know. The more experience, the more education I have, the more there is to learn. It doesn't mean we grow in ignorance over time. It's just the opposite. What we grow in is wisdom. The wisdom to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and but they are available. Answers are out there if we're willing to work for them. The last one I want to draw your attention to is focusing effect, which is a tendency to place too much importance on one aspect of an event. This is where we'll have one conversation with a prospect, or maybe one thing that a prospect says in a conversation, and we'll say, well, that's it. That's the whole key. And the answer is, it might be. It might be what we need to be able to move forward. It might be what we need to progress the conversation, but it isn't necessarily everything. So there are lots of great cognitive biases to learn about. If you haven't gone out to Wikipedia to read about cognitive biases, I highly recommend it. It's a fun 15 minutes. Keep those in mind as you're going on your quest for insight. These are some of the insights that here at Fortune's Path, places we go to seek out inspiration and insight. I'm a huge fan of everything written by Jason Fried and David Hyman Hansen. Those guys are, they founded Basecamp. And I'm not actually that big a fan of Basecamp, the application, but I love the way that they talk about running their business. Let me see here. Looks like we do have some chats. Okay, good. So Chris said that everybody can chat. Yes, so David had an example of somebody focusing on what they were good at versus they were not so good at, rebounds and foul shots. Let me see. The Rick Barry one, I'm afraid I don't get. So Eric Marin sent that one.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting story. This guy, Rick Barry, who's a free throw shooting guru.
Yeah.
He shoots underhanded.
Yep.
Granny style.
Yep.
And he coached Shaq on his free throw shot and got his percentage way up, I think up into like 50 or 60%.
Yeah.
But Shaq was so embarrassed to shoot that way. He kept shooting overhand and then
Yep.
still was terrible. And there's now a kid, there's like a top college player right now who's shooting Rick Barry style and crushing it and creating a bunch of news. So it's interesting, Shaq was more concerned about what people thought about how he looked than about actually succeeding. So it's an interesting lesson in listening to your mentors and putting your ego aside to focus on outcomes.
Eric, you also sent a chat in about thinking fast and slow. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, the cognitive biases that the Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, these two Israeli researchers are the guys who basically created that entire field. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics as a psychologist because his work on human behavior and biases was so influential in how people thought about economy and especially the standard sort of models of the rational decision maker. They're just like wrong, that most of economic theory is based on. But the book is great, and it is like where all of those things come from, and super interesting, fascinating book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the recommendation, and I'm happy to talk more about any of the things that were on the list. Let me see if I can get this to go backwards. There we go. So I mentioned Basecamp, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. I think Peter Thiel himself is an asshole, but the book has some very interesting insights. I'm an enormous fan of Wikipedia, including their business model. I think that concept of pay what you can is going to be more important for the arts and for things like Wikipedia. It's hugely important now. I think it's going to be even more important in the future. HubSpot's an amazing business to have taken on Salesforce as successfully as they have. And to my mind, I'm not a marketer, but I sort of think of them as being among the most successful implementers of content marketing and really creating a huge carve out from something as dominant as Salesforce. It's an incredible story. And I'm not that, the product's okay. But I think that their approach to business is really worth studying. Great Fool is a series of poems by Japanese Zen master Raikon. Highly recommend. As the Tao Te Ching. It's by the Chinese Taoist Lao Tzu. McKinsey Quarterly. McKinsey's, they don't touch anything for under $1 million, so they're very expensive thinkers. But they do publish some really interesting stuff. Some of it's kind of crap. But they have some good insights. I recently was doing research on work that they'd done around innovation and anxiety, and it was very helpful for some blog posts I've been writing about how to innovate during anxious times. There is an 18-year-old from Missouri, Gabe Fleischer, who's been writing a political email list called Wake Up to Politics, which is read by politicians and journalists all over the country. It's an amazing story. Gabe started doing this from his bedroom when he was about 15 or 16. And he is also in the Wikipedia model of send us what you can to support his work. And it's been interesting over the years to see how his work has matured. But it's a great summary of politics that you get at about 8 a.m. in your email. And then I've also, the Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, which was written in the early 18th century. And talks about the plague in London of the 17th century, the 1660s. It's pretty frightening to go back and read to see the similarities between London of 1665 and the United States of 2020. That's also been a source of inspiration for me recently. So let's talk a little bit about the game that you guys played, or I think we had 11 respondents to the survey, and I think 8 decided to try and play the game. There were 2 different scenarios. One was the jerk salesperson scenario, which was for product managers and product owners. And then the other scenario was for product marketers and for product designers. And I want to encourage you to go back and try this again after this presentation. Try to apply the 12 steps. There are 2 ways for each scenario to get all the way through. And I'm going to give $50 to the first one of you who goes back and completes the scenario start to finish and then send me an email about it, I'll go out and confirm, and I'll either send you the $50 via Venmo or give you an Amazon gift card, whichever you prefer. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can apply the 12 steps to improve this relationship with people at work, to make yourself more effective and to have more fun and sleep better at night. So the first scenario is you're hard at work on a communication about a strategic feature coming in the next release, and a salesperson comes into your office. They say, "You busy? I need to get a new feature in the next release. It's a big opportunity, and name of big deal person says we have to get this done. How do you respond?" And everybody was at least smart enough to recognize that the thing was to say, "What's the opportunity?" rather than to just cut the salesperson off right now. So after you ask them, "What's the opportunity?" you have three choices. So when you ask the opportunity, the salesperson says, "This thing's going to make my year. It's a huge takeaway from our biggest competitor. And what they want us to do is super simple." I'm sure nobody's ever heard that. So the thing to take away from this exchange, because at this point, you should be seeking to understand before trying to be understood. So you're applying step 4. You can decide what kind of a leader you want to be. And when you make that decision, think about who is the leader that you want to follow. So if you went into somebody's office and you needed something and you're asking them for that thing, how would you want that person to respond? And so you have three choices here. 2 of them are kind of selfish. What do they want done? And thanks, I'll follow up with the name of the big deal person. One of the answers is selfless. And so even if you don't really feel enthusiasm for being interrupted, I'm going to encourage you to show some empathy and enthusiasm for the salesperson. Sales is excessively difficult work. It's brutal. It's like digging ditches or banging rocks. And so this guy's got something on the line that he's excited about. If you show a little bit of enthusiasm for that, he says to you, "Thanks, I'm really excited and nervous. I'm either going to get promoted or fired. And I have a meeting with the prospect in 5 minutes. Do you want to sit in?" So the folks who took the test knew that it was important to get in on this meeting and to hear what this client had to say. And there are 3 responses here. 2 of those responses are what I'm calling smart selfish, which is, "What's the meeting about?" or "Sure." You know you need to get in the meeting. Saying something that encourages you to get in that meeting with that salesperson and be on their side, that's smart selfish. Dumb selfish is, "I have to finish this doc." One of the things about sales is that it's incredibly time sensitive. And salespeople tend to, when they get into a big opportunity, don't tend to have a long lens. They tend to look at the event that is directly in front of them. And that event can have a dramatic impact on what comes next. So part of sales is about continuing the conversation, finding a reason to have the next conversation. So when you inject yourself into a sales opportunity, you're trying to find a way to shape the conversation with the client so that way the salesperson doesn't run something off the rails, because in product, sales can ruin your life. If they go out and they land the biggest deal anybody's ever landed, everyone is going to congratulate them, even if what they sold was alligators and you're in the elephant business. You need to understand that even if they get blamed, even if they get called on the carpet, eventually, if they bring in the money, they're going to be forgiven. Not in 100% of organizations, but in many, many organizations, if they're selling, they're going to be forgiven. And the person who has to cash the blank check that they wrote is you in product. You're going to have to be the one who figures out how to implement this thing. So you need to insert yourself in a way where you can shape that conversation with the prospect and also be of assistance to the salesperson. So while you're seeking to understand, recognize that this guy has his biggest call of the year in 5 minutes. And this is where everybody broke down in the scenario. So, and believe me, I totally understand why someone would say, "Nosy, you're full of shit." I would never take this kind of crap from somebody if they said something to me like, "If you want me to say anything, write it down and show it to me first." Oh my God. What I'm going to encourage you, though, is to step back for a second and think about it like this. How insecure would someone have to be to say something like, "If you want to talk in this meeting, write it down and show it to me first"? So let's have a little sympathy for someone who is that insecure and think about your responses. A, the response is really about him. if you don't trust me, I shouldn't be in the meeting. C, which is what people selected, was if we're going to work together, we need to respect each other, is about you. And what I'm encouraging you to do is to give the response that's about the business. We should get on the call. So just like if you're going to have that deep personal humility because you're committed to the success of the organization, this guy told you this is his biggest sale, it could make his year, and he has a call with a prospect in 5 minutes. Now, in my opinion, is not the time to try to write your relationship with this person. So step 4, deciding what kind of a leader you can be. You can choose not to confront someone if the timing isn't right, but that doesn't mean you're never going to confront them. And then step 7, if you're going to embrace your assets and give up your defects, think about, is his reaction really about you? Or is it just that he's unbelievably insecure and doesn't understand that he comes across like a complete jerk when he says something like, write it down before you'll talk? The other thing is ask yourself about whether or not this is the best time to talk about it. And then step 11, if you want to improve your insight through contact with customers, colleagues, and other product leaders, hearing what the customer wants in this junction is more important than getting your relationship right with this weasel salesperson. So that's how I would encourage you to apply those steps. So for product, so take some, if you want to go back, try it again. If you get all the way through it, I'll send you $50 for the first one, first person who does it. So product marketers and designers, you had a slightly different scenario. So you're working on a deadline for the spring release and a salesperson comes into your office and they say, are you busy? Do you have some pictures about the winter release, the one coming up? And you're at a bit of a loss since it's spring and the winter release is 9 months away. How should you respond? We don't create communications before the release is locked down. What do you need? Or no one even knows what's in that release. And people knew that you should say, what do you need? So if you say to the salesperson, we never communicate, actually people said, we never communicate. If you say to the salesperson, we never communicate about the release, they might say to you, that's not true. We tell prospects about future releases all the time. Anyway, my prospect wants to know more about the double clone recycler feature. They're not going to implement until winter, so it doesn't matter that it isn't built yet. And you know that something is buzzing around the organization about some big new feature, and I made up the name double clone recycler. It's a MacGuffin, and it's supposed to be a big strategic improvement. You also know that it hasn't been done yet, and it's really just talk. So how do you respond? Again, this salesperson has the power to ruin your life. How are you going to reel them in, but also do it in a way where you can help them land their deal? Because that's what's best for the company, is that they land the deal, but they land the right deal. So what do you say to them? Well, what I'm encouraging you to think about is understand that they just told you we tell prospects about future releases all the time. That's super important information. And if you answer with, we can't commit to details about a release that far out, it sounds like you didn't hear them when they said, we tell prospects about releases all the time. Also, you don't want to say, what does your prospect need? Because now you're hearing that information through a filter, which is him. You really want to know from the prospect themselves what it is that the prospect needs. And then the last one, I would say, make your conversation about the customer. So again, what's best for the business? Why do they want to know about the double clone recycler? It'd be great if you could get in the meeting and hear what that customer or what that prospect is saying. So the application of step 4, what kind of leader you want to be? Again, who do you want to follow? I want to follow people who are easy to work with. I want to follow people who, when I go into their office and I need something, they don't just send me packing. They really listen to me. They really try to understand what it is that I'm after, and they help me. And step 7, embracing your assets and giving up your defects. Creativity might be one of your assets. And if it is, instead of saying, no, we can't do this, you're asking the wrong thing, think about how might we? How might we help this person? In this case, go kind of around the salesperson to understand what the client really needs and think, how might we help them? And then seeking to improve your insight with contact with customers, colleagues, and other product leaders. This is a chance for you to hear what sales really tells prospects. This is a chance for you to overturn some rocks, just like Link, and maybe find exactly what it is that you're looking for and that you need to solve the puzzle. So again, anybody who the first people who win going all the way through the scenarios. If you want to, I'll send you $50. I'm really interested to see if people are able to do it when they're applying the 12 steps. So William Paley was an English philosopher and clergyman in the 18th century. And he is credited with saying, contempt prior to examination is an intellectual vice from which the greatest faculties of mind are not free. And what I love about this is it encourages us to maintain an open mind when we're seeking inspiration, and to take it and to not go into a situation with our preconceived notions, whether those are cognitive biases or others, that could blind us from the information that we need to succeed. So, Chris, that's my prepared comments, but I'd love to hear from you guys what you all thought, and what was interesting, not so interesting, helpful, not helpful, things you might want to know about more of in future conversations, etc.
Nice. Thanks, Tom. Everybody, you should be able to unmute, etc. I think I've lifted all my restrictions.
Hey, this is Eric. I thought that was really, really great, super interesting. And I'm sure you did this on purpose, but I really want to kind of dig into the rest of the 12 steps.
Yeah.
Because how you applied those three was in those scenarios was totally fascinating and enlightening. And I'm very curious, and I'm opening up the forum to go just look at the list of the other 12 steps so I can sort of like ponder them each again. So
Yeah, let me go back. I'll go back and show them. And first of all, thank you so much for that comment. I really appreciate it. So I'm in the. Well, I don't want to talk. I've talked plenty. I want to hear from other folks what you guys thought.
The Zen poetry book, was that called Great Fool? Was that
Great Fool? Yeah. It's really you can get it on Amazon. It's a beautiful book.
awesome?
Let me see. Matsud, I put Breath of the Wild in there for you.
Thank you. That made my day.
That was the one who told me about that that game. I gave it to my son, and here in quarantine, I've been the one who's been playing it.
Nice.
Chris, what were your thoughts?
Oh, I thought it was great. One of the things I harp on quite a bit in product management is the importance of soft skills, since a lot of people immediately ask, if I want to be in product, what classes do I need to take on managing Jira tickets and writing user stories, et cetera. But so much of it ends up being the soft skills and people management. And that's what you put your primary emphasis on, which I think is great.
Yeah, I think it is a leadership position. And that means that we're always trying to influence people. Things that's tough about product is typically those people don't report to you. So like the pompous definition of product management is you're the CEO of your products. The real reality is that you're the majority whip. You have to gather people together into a constituency and drive them towards a change. And to do that, you need to create a vision that they can get behind. And you're going to do that through influence.
Depending on your organization, you may be the minority whip, actually.
Yeah, that's very true. That is very true. Other questions or comments? The other person I really encourage you, and I know I'm going to want to read more about her, is Mary Follett. I discovered her for the first time in this presentation. As I didn't realize she was the source of Management's the Art of Getting Things Done Through People. She's fascinating. She fell out of favor after she died and disappeared for decades, and then was rediscovered. And there's, I can't remember his name, but a famous management theorist said basically every good idea in management theory came from Mary Follett.
Is there a particular resource, like a book or article, that would be a good entry point?
I just start with a Wikipedia page. It's very good. And then she's got several, so I haven't read any of her books yet, but that's on my, need to learn more about her.
Hey, Tom. This is Mackenzie. I'm a product owner here.
Hi, Mackenzie.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this presentation. This has been awesome. One thing that I want to hear a little bit more about your practical thoughts on are what you talked about, where you should try to delegate the things that you're not so good at
Yes.
and what you are good at. And I'd like to hear about how do you discern what you're good at and what you're bad at.
Yeah. Oh no, it's
And
those are
then
great.
how do you delegate it in the practical sense, especially if you're not a manager of people?
Yeah. So delegation early in your career is difficult. And so if you're, and I don't know how, Mackenzie, I don't mean to infer that you're early in your career. I don't know if you may have been a product owner for 30 years.
I have not been a product owner for 30 years.
30 years. When determining what you're good at, what you're not good at, a lot of the times the things that are easiest for you are the things that you're best at. And so those things that don't require a ton of effort, that sort of flow naturally, that can be the things, and those often are the things that are most valuable to your organization. It's really important to seek honest feedback from the people around you about what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's helping? Unfortunately, we don't, in the normal course of business, we don't get thanked a whole lot. Now, Chris is a really good guy, and he may be the sort of boss who, whenever he does a one-on-one with you, starts off with, I thought this went well, and this went well. You did a great job in those three. This one thing I wanted, like, we could see change in this way. Most bosses aren't like that. And so you're going to need to seek that out with honest conversations with your peers and with others. The other thing to do is, are there other people in your team? Are you working on a project with other folks? Understand what comes naturally to them, what they like, and maybe you can trade. So you aren't delegating in the sense that you're going to a subordinate and saying, I need you to get this done. But you can trade responsibility for things in a project with other people, even if by sort of the definition of your job description, it sounds like you ought to be the one responsible for that. You're free to make fair trades with others, just as long as you continue to carry your weight. The other thing that to keep in mind is that the amount of time that goes into doing something has zero implication for the value of that thing. So it may take you 5 minutes or 2 minutes to do something. It could be the most important, most valuable thing you do for the project or for the company all day long, even if it only took you 2 minutes. So don't be sort of fooled into thinking the stuff that's really, really hard to do, that's the most valuable stuff. It's often not the case.
I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. San Francisco looks beautiful, by the way. Jacob, how are you? I'm glad you could make it.
Hello. I took a page out of your book and no, I'm just kidding. You were talking about how the most important things of the day may not necessarily take the longest time. So I made my client meeting only take 30 minutes.
Yeah. I'm sure the client thanks you for that.
They probably do. We got through our topics quickly and I didn't want to keep them any longer than necessary. I think everybody might have been on calls for hours today anyway. So yeah. I am thrilled to see the back half of this presentation. I actually got goosebumps at one point when you were going through the game. I did not. I'll admit I did not play the game.
Yeah, I saw that
the first time around. But it was fantastic. Very very deep and empathetic thoughts all around. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
And one thing I will say, Tom, just to piggyback on all of this, kind of directing it back to my team, I had a conversation earlier was it this week? I don't know, Chelsea, when you and I had that conversation, but I want to encourage everyone to create space in your schedules for just an opportunity, obviously to think about stuff like this, but just in general, taking time to just step back and do some deep work and carve out time to think about some of these things, relationships to invest in, et cetera. I know at times it can feel like the tyranny of the urgent, we're always busy. There's always a million Slack messages, et cetera. From my perspective, thinking about the 80-20 rule, if you can step back and carve out 2 hours and for all intents and purposes, you're not working and nobody knows that you're around because you can just focus and think, like I wholeheartedly endorse that type of work because I think that's when you're going to do some of your best work. So I just want to throw that out there as it's relevant given the topics that we were just discussing and make sure everybody feels like that's not only an option, it's highly encouraged.
Chris, I think it's a great habit. Absolutely. That's it's very hard to think and do at the same time. And so you building that space, even if you're putting a time on your calendar for it, so it looks like you've got a meeting, if that meeting's with yourself, that can be an effective way to carve it out. And I love the phrase you use, Chris, about the tyranny of the urgent. And that's a recency bias. That's another one of our cognitive biases. And that, you can respond to every email, every Slack message, and you'll be a responsive wreck. So there's an unlimited demand for communication from you guys. And many of you sit at a nexus of a lot of different people who need the information you have to get their jobs done. So finding efficient ways to distribute that information in the organization that frees you up where you don't, where you have some time to think.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you again for doing this.
A quick question.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Eric.
Really quick.
Sure.
So when I pull up the type form,
Mm-hmm.
do the selections for the steps that you're interested in have any impact on the
No,
game? Okay.
No, it's just the role that you select. So if you select product owner or product manager, you get the jerk salesperson scenario. And if you select product designer or product marketer, you get the premature requester scenario.
Gotcha.
But then you can, so I won't look at the steps that people are asking for. Thank you for going back in to try it again, Eric. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Well, Chris, if you're interested, I'd love to come back and keep doing this. Because it's extremely helpful to me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Tom. We really appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
And we will certainly be in touch. Thanks everybody for joining.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.